Hello and welcome to Twisted Britain, a podcast on true crime in Britain with a sprinkling of the weird and the macabre. And your host is me, Bob Dale. Well, first off, hello everybody. Good evening, good day, good afternoon, good morning, good whatever time of the day you're listening to this. I hope everybody's all right and you're all enjoying this new dawn of freedom that we have. The illustrious leaders of this country have allowed us, out a bit more. And well, those of you down south are getting to go to the pub before I am, which makes me very, very sad. Talking of pubs, I'm obviously not recording this in the Settle-In, as it's not yet open yet. And if I had violin music, I would play it now. But I do have my fingers crossed that we'll be there soon. And as soon as Leslie has the ability to open, I'm sure she'll let us all back in. And as soon as I have the go-ahead, I will start recording in the cellar because it is the most socially distant you can possibly ever be. In fact, nobody wants to go in there. Just me because it's closer to the pints. But anyway, I shall not go on too much further. I'll start here by saying sorry for the gap in the podcast. It's obviously been a little while since you've had me in your ears, and I suppose that could be seen as a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. I am happily now back in front of the microphone, which I am recording in a different place to the last episode you will have heard. The break in the podcast was due to the Dale family moving house. Now, we moved house right in the middle of full lockdown in Scotland, which was, I suppose moving house at all at any time isn't a fun thing to do, but I wouldn't ever advise anybody does it during a lockdown. It's just don't. If we go back to full lockdown, which I hope we don't have to do, don't move house. It was rubbish. We did have wonderful help from a moving company that we found locally, and the guys were absolutely superb, and that obviously made things slightly easier for us. But yes, moving with a toddler in tow into a house that is needing some work, shall we say, hasn't been the easiest thing to do while you can't get any builders or anybody in. It took us a couple of days to even get internet, and I didn't realise how reliant you are on such modern technologies until you don't have them. But hey-ho, here we are. I can't really complain. I have a nice new garden and a nice new barbecue. So, all's good, really. Oh, and it's sunny. It's really sunny in Scotland at the moment. I hope it is where you are. I know there was talk of some thunderstorms this week, so I hope that hasn't hit you lot. Anyway, due to moving, we had a break in the podcast, and I also had a break in the ability to get hold of anybody for challenges. And it's made me have a wee think. What I'm going to do from now on is I'm going to deliver Bob's Twisted Tales to you this evening, this day, this morning, or I'm going to deliver in this episode a Bob's Twisted Tale. And going forward, I think I'll probably look at doing them on the regular, will be Bob's Twisted Tales. And I'll get challenges in possibly every third or fourth episode, maybe once every couple of months or something like that, for a couple of reasons. It's hard to get people to commit to doing them. And I'm really rubbish at asking people to do them. So you'll just have to suffice with whatever I can come up with. If you do, however, have somebody that you think would be really good to give me a challenge, do hit us up on any of the social media channels, and I'd happily chase any of them up. I do have a few in. I have one in from the wonderful Mike at Murder Mile. He sent me one. And a few others. One of which I'm going on to tell you about in a second. But fear not, there will always be a twisted tale from my lips to your ears. Sounds weird. I didn't mean it to sound as weird as it did. But anyway, since we've had that almost unplanned break, I will get back to doing fortnightly episodes, and I will make sure that one hits you every 2 weeks. So, as I said, I do have a couple of challenges in the Bob Bank as such, and one of them ties in quite nicely with next week being the 50th episode. Now, I'm sure the eagle-eyed amongst you had noticed that we were coming up to the 50th episode, and I'm as surprised as you are. I never thought we'd get this far. I know when we started this, it was always just a let's see how it goes. But here we are, the big 5-0. Not me, might I say, before anybody makes any wonderful age jokes there. Twisted Britain's at 5-0. And I do have a challenger specifically for the 50th episode. Now, the 50th episode will be slightly different. It will be me talking my normal drivel at the beginning, followed by the challenge, followed by the story, followed by the response to the story, all in one episode. The challenger has agreed to listen to the raw episode before it goes live, and then have a chat with me so we can record that and send out the same one. It is a person some of you may recognise from mentions in the podcast before, but I shall say no more about that just now, as mainly I haven't recorded any of it yet. But it will happen, don't you worry. So just keep an eye on your feeds and that'll hit you in a couple of weeks' time. So this week's Twisted Tale is one I found randomly. I know most of the time I tell you when I find things, I tell you I find them randomly. But this one I wasn't even looking for something for Twisted Britain. I can't remember. I was just Googling the rabbit hole, down a rabbit warren than it is the internet. And I found the Twisted Tale of the first ever double dickhead. Now, normally, as you will have heard if you're a regular listener, Nadine and I used to put people on a bad bastard list. One that I always wanted to pop on a t-shirt, but I never got around to doing so. Maybe we'll get to that one day. But I'm going to start a new list entirely. And I kind of hoped that it would only ever contain this one name. But sadly, the more I've read about this story and you go back and forward, it's not going to contain this one name, but this is the first double dickhead. We have all seen that British crime is a fucked up dark history, so it should come as no surprise to me or anyone that there's more than one double dickhead in the world. Now, the reason we've called the list that is it's based off of this. This is the story of one of the only men in Scottish history to have been allowed out of jail to go on and commit the same crime as he was locked up for. And in this case, it was murder. Now, I'm sure there are hundreds, if not thousands, of cases of people going to jail for drugs or petty crime or antisocial behaviour or whatever it might be. Going and serving their time and getting out and just hitting the revolving door again and going straight back in to jail. But not Joseph McGinley. Joseph McGinley managed to go to jail not for murder, not only once, but twice. He went through the reform of jail, only to just pop out and kill again. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm trivializing this at all. I just think it's a wonderful highlighting of how good the prison reform system actually is. I mean, what the fuck is weekend release anyway? We'll get to that in a bit. So, to cover what happened, let's go back to what is the start, shall we say. It's 1973 in Dalmington in Ayrshire, and 18-year-old Joseph McGinley has already been charged with and convicted of assault with intent to ravish. Now, assault with the intent to ravish is a horrible statement. It's a grouping of words I didn't want to say, but here we are. He was sentenced to this in 1972, and his sentence was 2 years residential training, which, from what I could find, means that he had to be at a kind of live-in style home reform course where he would either have to live in a hostel type situation where he had to attend courses, or whether he had to check into courses on a regular basis and live wherever he wanted to do. Either way, it doesn't really matter. What we know for a fact is he certainly didn't complete and attain full reformation. Reformation is probably not the right word there, but anyway. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Just a year later, and he's back in court, this time for the most heinous of crimes. This time he's there being charged with murder and attempted murder. Joseph McGinley murdered Elizabeth Cassidy, who was 16 years old, for which he was convicted. He was also convicted on the same day of the attempted murder of her 13-year-old friend, Josephine, or Josie, as she was known. Elizabeth had been battered to death in her flat in Glasgow, and Josie had been left with permanent scars. And as I said, he was kind of known to the police, so when it came to the court, they threw what they could at him. For the murder of Elizabeth, he was sentenced to life, and he was also sentenced to 10 years for the attempted murder of Josie. Now, we all know that in the British prison systems, life doesn't really mean life. What it really means is that you will be released after a set term, or considered for release after a set term. And that set term is originally put in place by the judge who is sentencing you. Now, I will be very upfront with you and say that I didn't find a lot about the original sentencing. I could see what happened, that he obviously was charged with murder, but I couldn't find what the sentence was. But I do know for a fact that 23 years later, after that sentence, Joseph was out on weekend release. Now, I can hear you crying from there. What the fuck is weekend release? Well, a bit about that before we get to why he gets a category of his own. So, having spent 22 to 23 years in jail, Joe was put on a training for freedom course. Now, whoever the clever dick was that decided that this horrible creature was ready to go back into society, I don't think any of us will ever know. But for some reason, it was decided that part of his reintroduction to society was the best thing to do would be to release him from jail, just for the weekend, where he would live in a hostel in Edinburgh and have to report back to the prison in Northside to do his normal 5 days back in jail. Now, I don't want to sound like wee judgy Bob, but is that really a good idea? Let's take this case as an example. This creature had killed a child and attempted to kill another. But, he can be trusted to have a wee weekend out? I don't think so. Anyway, I'll get back on track. Training for freedom was exactly what it said in the tin. They let people out of jail who'd been in for a long time, which Joseph had been. At the time, he was one of Scotland's longest serving prisoners. These people are let out into society for the weekend, living in a hostel as a way of integration. So I suppose the argument there is they've spent, well, in this case, 22 years in jail. So when they come back out, the world will have changed a bit. So to allow them to readjust, they have time between the institution and real life, shall we say, and allow them to readjust. Bollocks. So anyway, this particular weekend release was in 1996, and Joseph was out for the weekend, and well, didn't fuck about. Here's what he did, according to him. Well, he visited his family. Nothing much else. Well, he did. He visited his family. That much is true. But he got up to a few other things, and one in particular. In a flat in Edinburgh, he strangled and stabbed through the heart 22-year-old Mandy Barnett. Small detail to miss out there when he's telling you what he did. Mandy worked in a club in Edinburgh, and she was by no stretch of the imagination a prissy wee thing. Her boyfriend was also in jail. He was in for murder as well. John Balsey. We'll save him for a different day. And as such, her meeting with Joseph could have been almost understood when you know that Mandy was expecting somebody. She was expecting to hand over some drugs to someone who was going to smuggle them into jail for her lovely partner, who was, of course, also reformed. Well, I suppose the drugs is a step up from battering an 82-year-old to death, but as I say, that's for another day. So her reformed man would never send anybody dangerous to see her, right? Well, that might be right, but unfortunately Joseph hadn't been sent by her partner. Under that pretense, however, she let him into her flat. And during the time there, weirdly, her partner, Balsey, had called the flat. And Mandy, who thought McGinley was there as who'd been sent by her partner, passed the phone over. Now, Balsey didn't recognise the name that Mandy had given him, but then could have been anybody, I suppose, using a fake name. But he did recognise the voice. And he recognised McGinley from in prison. And this worried him. He knew McGinley's past, so he kind of alerted prison staff that he was there. Mandy made the mistake of letting her guard down a bit. McGinley, sadly, went on to strangle and stab Mandy through the heart before placing her in a bath of hot water. She was found in the bath by the police, and when she was found, she was partly undressed, but there was no sign of sexual assault, which led most to think that actually it was just a pure bloodlust that had driven the attack. So how did the police find Mandy? Well, Mandy failed to appear at a jail visit with her partner, Wilson, and on top of his worries that he'd reported to prison staff, the police visited Mandy's flat in Edinburgh. They found the place almost spotless, and as I say, with Mandy's body in the bath. Obviously, the combination of these were trying to cover up the crime and trying to disguise the time of death. This, however, was to no avail, as the police found evidence of blood in the flat that didn't belong to Mandy, and on testing it, it was found to be that of Joseph McGinley. However, even when confronted with this, McGinley said, "Nah, not there. Not mine." And the police couldn't find any blood on his clothes. But yet, since Mandy had been stabbed with a rather large blade, there must be blood somewhere. McGinley eventually didn't deny being in the flat. He said, however, he had been there for a drug deal. So the family visit I mentioned earlier, well, that wasn't due to take place that weekend. In fact, it had even come as a bit of a shock to his family. But when the police approached them and asked him if he'd been there, they said he had been there, but no, he hadn't done anything odd. They said, had he changed his clothes or anything? And they said no. However, after weeks of persistent asking, family finally admitted that not only had he been there and changed his clothes, they'd washed and scrubbed them as well, making them guilty bastards in my eyes as well. Not guilty of murder, but guilty nonetheless. McGinley was obviously charged with murder and just taken to the High Court in Edinburgh. And I mean, taken, as ridiculously, he is already in jail, lest we forget. He was obviously found guilty of the murder, as there was no motive for the crime. I mean, he could have been there for drugs, but he did fulfill what was a lust for blood while there, and the reason for that we'll never know. Since there was no motive for this crime, Judge Lord MacLean in sentencing told him that he was a very dangerous man, especially to women. Lord MacLean sentenced him to life again, this time putting a minimum term of 30 years on it, meaning that Joseph be in his 70s at least when his minimum term had been served. And let's hope they don't fuck it up and let him out early again. In the trial, they heard from Josie, the girl who had survived his first attack. Afterwards, she stood, still badly scarred, and said, "After what he did to me and Betty, it's a scandal that he was let out. That poor lassie was let down by the system. So were her family." Although there were cries for an inquiry into why he was let out at all, none ever took place. Let's just say that this monster waited 22 years, and on his third weekend out of jail in his training program, he murdered again. I hope he never sees the outside world, ever. Now, I'm sure you may have grasped my thoughts on this case of early/weekend release. Well, I think in this scenario, it was a ridiculous thing to happen. He wasn't reformed. He'd been caught doing other shit while in jail. And whoever made that decision made a mistake. And there's blood on their hands too. However, I'm sure it does work in certain scenarios. I'm sure the use of tags and phased release is not a bad one. But for fuck's sake, let's not do it for people who kill kids. Now, that's a pleasant note, I know, and I'll let you mull over your own thoughts on prison systems. And please do feel free to post them on all the social media channels. But what I will say is, sadly, in the reading I've done for this, it's clear that Joseph McGinley is not the only man that needs to go on the double dickhead list. Maybe I'll do another few over the coming months, but it just really leaves me mad to read about it. Especially when there are signs that these people are not reformed. Why should they be out in public? Life should mean life, or should it? I don't know. I'm not here to make that judgment. But I do think that somebody like this shouldn't have been let out at all. Now, I'd like to give credit here to, I don't know who the author was, but the Scottish Daily Record is where I got a lot of my information from this, from an article in 2008. And then it was a good read. And that's where I got most of this information from. I'm not going to speculate on whether I think there needs to be reform in systems. I'm not going to speculate about any of that. I just, like I say, I've already said Joseph McGinley should never have been let out on weekend release. And I hope he never sees the light of day again. But it's just a really sad case. And I feel for Josie, who is the survivor in all of this. Mandy unmistakably let a man in her house who knew was going to do anything. And Elizabeth was a very sad 16-year-old who was attacked by a horrible, horrible man. I do hope Lord McLean has imposed the right sentence this time, let's say. Anyway, before we get any deeper and darker and sadder into this, I would like to say thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that. I know it's not one that has a huge amount of fact and information in it, but I just found it such an interesting case that I thought it was one that I should throw in as a Bob's Twisted Tale, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, you can always go on and rate and subscribe anywhere you listen to your podcasts, and that should be everywhere and anywhere that you can find Twisted Britain. Please do feel free to join us on social media and let me know what your thoughts on not only this case are, but all of the other ones that we've covered in the past. To those of you who have subscribed through Patreon, thank you very much for sticking with me in the last few months. The support means a huge amount, and I can guarantee you that all the money that comes in through Patreon has been reinvested into the show in some way or another. I will get back to doing Patreon episodes as of next month. There will be one out in the middle of July, and I will make sure that there's one out every month. The Patreon page will take a bit of a refreshing. There will be one tier, and it will be for people who want to support Twisted Britain, and everybody that does that will get access to an extra episode a month. Alexa has just told me it's currently June, apparently, which is freaky because it means she's listening to me. Sorry, that's thrown me a wee bit there. I suppose the only other thing I was going to say is if you listen to Twisted Britain and you don't listen to any other UK independent true crime podcasts, there are loads of them out there, and I'm going to put a post at the top of the Facebook page. If you haven't listened to the likes of Seeing Red, Murder Mile, True Crime Enthusiast, UK True Crime, all of their hosts are very much like myself. They do this out of passion, and every single one of them is great. I could go on, the list is massive, but do hit them up and make sure that you let them know that Bob sent you their way. I'll leave you, as I always do, with a thank you, love you, bye, and I'll speak to you again soon.